She walked into the classroom with dreams bigger than her voice. But the moment she spoke, the whispers started. Her accent wasn't just different. It became the reason they laughed, excluded, and silenced her. Every word she tried to share was met with mockery. Every dream dismissed before it could take shape. But what no one expected was that the very thing they used to shame her would one day command stages across the world. How does a girl once rejected for her voice rise to inspire millions? This is her story. Her name was Amara. She grew up in a small town where her laughter filled the air, and her imagination seemed endless. At home, her family embraced their heritage, their conversations rich with rhythm, tone, and warmth that carried generations of stories. For Amara, her accent wasn't just a way of speaking, it was a connection to her roots, a living piece of who she was. But outside the comfort of her home, the world didn't see it that way. From her earliest school days, Amara noticed the stares when she read aloud in class, the smirks that spread across her classmates' faces, the teacher's subtle wince when she mispronounced a word in her unique cadence. It wasn't that her English was broken. Every word carried meaning. It was just that she didn't sound like everyone else. As she grew older, those small moments began to pile up. At lunch tables, her peers mimicked the way she spoke, twisting her words into cruel jokes. In group projects, her suggestions were brushed aside before she even finished speaking. Slowly, she learned to stay quiet, hiding her thoughts behind silence, believing it was safer that way. At home, her mother noticed the change. Amara, once so talkative, now gave short answers, her spark dimming. "Your voice is beautiful," her mother reminded her. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." But the world outside didn't echo those words. At school, beauty and worth seemed to be measured by how well one fit in, and Amara's voice marked her as different. Still, deep inside, Amara clung to her dreams. She loved stories, devouring books late into the night, filling journals with her own writing. She wanted to share her words with the world, but each attempt to speak in front of others felt like stepping onto a battlefield she wasn't ready for. Her heart raced, her palms sweated, and her tongue felt heavy with the weight of every possible judgment. Then came the moment that would define her early years. In middle school, she auditioned for a role in the school play, a chance, she thought, to prove herself. She practiced for weeks, memorizing every line, pouring her heart into the character. But when the day came, and she recited the lines in her natural accent, the auditorium filled with laughter. The teachers tried to quiet the students, but the damage was done. Amara stood frozen on the stage, her cheeks burning as tears threatened to fall. She walked off before she could finish, her dream collapsing with every mocking echo in her ears. From that day on, she made a promise to herself, never again. She would hide her voice, bury her accent, and try her best to blend in. But in silencing herself, she also silenced her dreams. The world might have thought her accent was a flaw, but deep down, it was still the very thing that set her apart. And one day, the world would learn just how powerful it truly was. High school should have been a new chapter for Amara, a chance to reinvent herself, to shed the memories of that humiliating moment on stage. But instead, it became a battlefield of its own. By then, she had mastered the art of silence. She sat at the back of classrooms, avoiding eye contact when teachers asked questions, praying her turn to speak would never come. Yet silence carried its own punishment. Teachers marked her as disengaged. Classmates overlooked her completely. In the hallways, whispers followed her about her clothes, her hair, but always circling back to her accent. Even when she tried to mimic the way others spoke, softening her words to sound more acceptable, the effort only invited more ridicule. "Why do you talk like that?" They would sneer as if her very existence were a mistake. It wasn't only peers who dismissed her. In one devastating moment, a guidance counselor sat across from her, flipping through her file and said with a sigh, "Public speaking may not be for you. Amara, you should focus on something behind the scenes." The words stung like a verdict, stripping her of a dream she had never dared to say aloud. It wasn't just advice, it was rejection, an institutional confirmation that her voice didn't belong. But Amara's silence couldn't hide her talent forever. In private, her notebooks filled with poetry, speeches, and stories, her secret world where words flowed freely without judgment. When she read her own writing to herself, she felt powerful, alive. Yet, the moment she imagined speaking them aloud, her throat closed up. The memory of laughter, the sting of mockery, replayed like a cruel soundtrack in her mind. Then came a turning point. Her English teacher, Ms. Rivera, assigned a project where students had to present a personal story to the class. Amara tried to negotiate. "Can I just turn it in on paper?" But the answer was firm. She had to speak. For days, she wrestled with panic. She practiced in her room, whispering the words so softly even she could barely hear them. The night before the presentation, she almost tore the paper to shreds. When her turn came, she stood at the front of the classroom, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the paper. She read in a rush, stumbling over words, her accent stronger in her nervousness. By the time she finished, a few students snickered, and her chest caved inward with shame. But then, unexpectedly, someone clapped. It was faint, awkward, but real. Ms. Rivera smiled gently, nodding in encouragement. That small moment planted a seed. It wasn't enough to erase the pain of rejection, but it was the first time Amara realized that not everyone was against her voice. That maybe, just maybe, her words mattered. Still, the road forward wasn't easy. In college, the cycle repeated itself. Professors praised her writing but marked her down on oral presentations. Debate clubs and student councils turned her away, explaining she wasn't the right fit. Each rejection drove the knife deeper, convincing her she'd never be taken seriously because of the way she spoke. She considered giving up entirely, abandoning her dream of sharing her words with the world. But life has a way of pushing us toward our destiny, even when we resist it. One day, she stumbled upon a flyer for a student storytelling event. The theme, finding strength in difference. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her first instinct was to crumple the flyer and walk away. But something inside her, an ember that refused to die, whispered that maybe this was her chance. She signed up. And what happened on that stage would begin to change everything. The auditorium lights were blinding, and Amara could feel every beat of her heart pounding in her ears. She stood backstage at the student storytelling event, clutching her paper so tightly it shook in her hands. The theme, finding strength in difference, felt like both a cruel joke and a challenge. For weeks she had debated dropping out, but each time, something inside refused to let her quit. Her name was called. The applause was polite, but to her it sounded like judgment. She stepped onto the stage, legs heavy as if weighed down by years of mockery. Her eyes darted across the room, rows of faces, some bored, some curious. She gripped the podium, her throat dry, her palms slick. The first words tumbled out, awkward and rushed. Her accent thickened under pressure, wrapping itself around each syllable. She braced for laughter, for whispers, for the sting of dismissal. But the room was silent, waiting, watching. Her hands shook, and for a moment she considered running. The memory of middle school haunted her, the laughter that had crushed her spirit, the shame that had silenced her for years. She could almost hear it again, echoing in her head. They're going to laugh. They're going to laugh. But then her eyes caught a familiar sight in the crowd. Ms. Rivera, her old English teacher, sitting near the front with a soft, steady smile. And in that moment, Amara remembered the small clap, the faint but genuine support she'd once received. It wasn't much, but it was proof that her voice mattered to someone. She took a deep breath, lowered the paper, and let her words come from her heart instead of the page. She spoke about growing up different, about being told she didn't belong, about the nights she cried into her pillow because of something as natural as her accent. Her voice trembled, cracked, but it didn't break. The more she spoke, the steadier it became. She described the pain of rejection, the cruelty of being mocked for something she couldn't change. But then she shifted. She spoke of her heritage, the beauty of her family's language, the rhythm of voices around her dinner table. She told the crowd that her accent wasn't a flaw, but a living echo of her ancestors, a melody of resilience that had carried her this far. By now, the room was transfixed. No one was whispering. No one was laughing. Every face was locked on her, some with tears glistening in their eyes. Amara felt a strange surge of power, something she had never felt before. For years, her accent had been her cage, but on that stage, it became her strength. The more she leaned into her story, the louder her conviction grew. Her voice carried not just her words, but generations of silenced voices, stories that had never been heard. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every child who had ever been told their voice wasn't good enough. By the time she finished, the room erupted. The applause wasn't polite this time. It was thunderous, echoing off the walls, rolling over her like a wave. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering. Some shouted her name. Amara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sound, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't ashamed of her accent. She was proud of it. That moment changed everything. What had once been her greatest source of pain became the foundation of her purpose. She walked off that stage no longer the girl who stayed silent to fit in, but a woman who had found her power in the very thing others tried to break. What Amara didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning, that the voice once mocked in a classroom would one day echo across nations. That night after the storytelling event, Amara couldn't sleep. The echoes of applause still rang in her ears, and for the first time, she replayed them without doubt. Instead of mocking laughter, she heard validation. Instead of rejection, she heard belonging. She realized something profound. Her voice, exactly as it was, had power. Not despite her accent, but because of it. Word of her performance spread across campus. Students who had once overlooked her now approached her in the cafeteria, thanking her for her courage. Professors invited her to share her story in classes, framing it as an example of resilience. For the first time, Amara wasn't shrinking into silence. She was stepping forward, invited to use her voice. But the real turning point came when a professor encouraged her to enter a regional, public speaking competition. At first, she resisted. The old fears whispered, "They'll laugh again. You don't belong there." But something stronger spoke back this time. She remembered the faces in the auditorium, the tears in their eyes, the way her words had moved them, and she knew she couldn't go back to silence. She entered. Standing on that larger stage, she felt the nerves rise again, but she no longer tried to hide her accent. Instead, she embraced it, letting every word flow with honesty and conviction. She spoke about identity, about the way society demands assimilation at the cost of individuality, about the courage it takes to love yourself when the world tries to tell you you're not enough. When she finished, the applause was deafening, and this time, she walked away with the first-place trophy. That victory opened doors she never imagined. Invitations poured in to schools, conferences, and eventually, international platforms. She began speaking not just about her story, but about the larger truth it represented. The way systemic prejudice strips dignity from people for their differences. The way accents, appearances, and cultural markers are weaponized against them. Audiences across the world resonated with her. Words because they saw themselves in her. Soon, Amara's name appeared on flyers for global summits and leadership forums. She traveled from country to country, addressing halls filled with thousands. Her voice broadcast to millions online. Ironically, the very accent she had once been ashamed of became her signature. It made her stand out, made her memorable, made her real. Where others had seen weakness, the world now saw strength. But more than the accolades, it was the quiet moments that mattered most. After her talks, young people lined up to meet her, tears in their eyes as they shared their own stories of being silenced. A boy from Kenya told her he had stopped speaking in class because of the way his classmates mocked his accent. A girl from Brazil whispered that she felt embarrassed every time she spoke English, convinced her dreams were impossible. To each of them, Amara said the words she once longed to hear. Your voice is your power. Don't let anyone take it from you. And though her life had transformed, she never forgot the pain that had shaped her. She remembered the girl who once sat silently at the back of the classroom, the one who walked off stage in tears, believing her dreams had died. It was for her, and for millions like her, that Amara kept speaking. Her story became more than personal triumph. It became a reminder of a deeper truth, that racism and prejudice often disguise themselves as judgments about accents, appearances, or culture. Society tries to strip people of their identity, convincing them to conform. But in reality, the very things we're told to hide are often our greatest strengths. Amara's journey proved that rejection doesn't define us, resilience does. That the voices once silenced can rise the loudest. That what the world labels as different is often the most powerful force for change. And so, the girl who was once rejected for her accent stood tall as a global speaker, carrying a message that echoed far beyond any stage. If a voice can be mocked into silence, it can also be lifted into greatness. The question is, how many more voices will the world try to silence before it finally learns to listen?